The Vanishing Queen. In 1922, while Howard Carter was making headlines with King Tutankhamun's golden tomb, another team of archaeologists was puzzling over a more peculiar discovery at Deir el-Bahri. There, amid the sun-baked cliffs of ancient Thebes, they found something that defied explanation. Hundreds of systematic chisel marks, meticulously carved to obliterate a pharaoh's name and image from temple walls, statues, and obelisks. But these weren't the usual acts of ancient vandalism or political revenge. These were precise, calculated strikes, as if someone had attempted to surgically remove this ruler from history itself. The mystery deepened when they realized the destroyed images belonged to one of Egypt's most successful pharaohs, a woman who had ruled as a man, built Egypt's most magnificent monuments, and then, inexplicably, orchestrated her own disappearance from historical record. This is the story of Hatshepsut, the female king who rewrote the rules of ancient power, only to deliberately erase herself from the pages of history in what would become one of archaeology's greatest detective stories. Hatshepsut, the unlikely pharaoh. The winter air hung thick with incense as Princess Hatshepsut made her way through Karnak's towering columns. As the eldest daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I, she had been groomed from birth for a life of divine privilege, but not for the throne itself. That destiny belonged to her half-brother, born to one of her father's lesser wives. Like all royal daughters before her, Hatshepsut's purpose was clear: to marry the future king and produce the next male heir. Yet even as a child, she demonstrated an uncanny grasp of power that set her apart from her predecessors. At age 12, she already held the prestigious title of God's Wife of Amun, making her the highest-ranking priestess in Egypt. The position granted her unprecedented access to the kingdom's most powerful religious institution and its vast wealth. She learned to read hieroglyphs, mastered the complex rituals of Egyptian theology, and absorbed the intricate politics of the royal court. Her father, recognizing something extraordinary in his daughter, broke with tradition by allowing her to attend council meetings and military parades, spaces typically reserved for princes, not princesses. But fate had other plans for Egypt's most prepared princess. When Thutmose I died suddenly in 1493 BCE, the court was thrown into crisis. Her half-brother, now Thutmose II, ascended to the throne, and as custom dictated, Hatshepsut became his great royal wife. The new king was young, possibly sickly, and woefully unprepared for rule. In the shadows of power, Hatshepsut's careful education suddenly took on new significance. While her husband struggled with the burden of kingship, she quietly demonstrated her capability in managing state affairs, building a network of loyal supporters among Egypt's elite families and priesthood. When Thutmose II died after a brief reign of only 3 years, he left behind a son, Thutmose III, born to a lesser wife named Isis. The boy was barely old enough to walk, much less rule the most powerful kingdom on earth. In that moment of crisis, all eyes turned to Hatshepsut. She had spent her entire life preparing for a role that didn't exist. A woman who would need to rule Egypt, not merely as a regent protecting her stepson's claim, but as someone who understood power deeply enough to seize it. As she stood before the assembled court to accept the regency, no one could have predicted that this was merely the first step in one of history's most audacious political transformations. The evolution of Hatshepsut, from queen regent to female pharaoh. Inside the sanctum of Karnak Temple, a transformation was underway. The woman who had entered as queen regent emerged in the regalia of a pharaoh, complete with the false beard, broad shoulders, and muscular build of a king. Hatshepsut's metamorphosis from regent to ruler wasn't just a matter of grabbing power. It was an intricate dance of political genius and theological manipulation. In year 7 of her regency, she made her boldest move yet, ordering royal sculptors to depict her not as a woman ruling in a man's place, but as a man himself, Matkara Hatshepsut, king of Upper and Lower Egypt. The court scribes worked overtime, crafting a divine narrative that would legitimize her unprecedented claim. They composed an elaborate tale of her divine birth, in which the god Amun himself had taken the form of her father to mate with her mother, thereby making her the god's own daughter. The story, carved into the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, was a masterpiece of political propaganda. But Hatshepsut wasn't content with just telling the story, she lived it. She appeared in public wearing the traditional king's kilt and crown, her chest bare and muscular like a male pharaoh's. The royal proclamations began referring to her with male pronouns, though fascinatingly, they often mixed feminine and masculine titles in the same sentence. This wasn't merely a woman pretending to be a man, it was something far more complex. Hatshepsut had created an entirely new category of being, a female king, someone who embodied both the divine feminine and masculine aspects of rulership. Her officials, initially skeptical, found themselves serving a leader who combined the traditional masculine authority of kingship with a shrewd political intelligence that transformed Egypt's bureaucracy. The young Thutmose III, rather than being shunted aside, was kept close as co-ruler, trained in military arts, and given a position of genuine respect, though real power remained firmly in Hatshepsut's grasp. She had achieved what no woman before her had managed, turning Egypt's rigid gender-based power structure into something fluid enough to accommodate her ambition, while maintaining the stability that Egyptian society prized above all else. Egypt's Golden Age. A forest of obelisks rose into the desert sky, monuments of polished red granite that pierced the heavens like spears of light. Hatshepsut had ordered these massive monoliths cut from the quarries of Aswan, each one carved from a single stone, and dragged hundreds of miles to Thebes. The largest pair, soaring nearly 100 feet high, were at the time the tallest structures ever erected in Egypt. One still stands at Karnak today, its shadow tracking the sun across temple grounds just as it did 3,500 years ago. The other lies broken, whispering tales of ancient ambition. But Hatshepsut's true masterpiece was taking shape on the western bank of the Nile. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri was unlike anything Egypt had seen before, a series of elegant terraces rising from the desert floor toward the sheer cliffs behind them, each level adorned with delicate columns and intricate reliefs. The architect, Senenmut, had risen from humble origins to become one of her most trusted advisors, and together they created a structure that would redefine Egyptian architecture. Gardens of exotic trees and shrubs brought back from distant lands perfumed the air. The temple's design was so revolutionary that New Kingdom pharaohs would spend the next 1,000 years trying to replicate its grandeur. Yet perhaps her most daring venture lay beyond Egypt's borders. In the 8th year of her reign, Hatshepsut launched an ambitious trading expedition to the mysterious land of Punt, a journey not attempted since the Old Kingdom, 5 centuries earlier. 5 ships, their hulls packed with trade goods, set sail down the Red Sea. When they returned, they brought back riches that captured Egypt's imagination. Fresh myrrh trees with their roots wrapped in baskets of soil, exotic animal skins, gold, ivory, and aromatic woods. The scenes of this expedition, carved in vivid detail on her temple walls, show not just the goods brought back, but the foreign people themselves, their stilt houses, and even their queen depicted with startling realism, down to her pronounced obesity and curved spine. These reliefs provide our only window into this lost African kingdom. Under Hatshepsut's rule, Egypt entered a golden age of peace, prosperity, and artistic innovation. The wealth flowing into royal coffers funded an explosion of architectural projects across the kingdom. But more than just buildings, she was constructing a legacy, one that would seemingly prove eternal until the day she decided to make it vanish. Her monument stood as testament to a reign marked not by military conquest, but by artistic achievement and commercial expansion. Yet even as she built higher and reached farther than any ruler before her, forces were gathering that would lead to one of history's most mysterious acts of self-erasure. The politics of identity. The relationship between Hatshepsut and her stepson Thutmose III remains one of ancient history's most fascinating power dynamics. While she ruled as king, the young prince was not locked away or marginalized as one might expect. Instead, he was groomed to become Egypt's greatest military commander. Court records show him leading the army by his teenage years, commanding troops and learning strategy while his stepmother aunt managed the affairs of state. Whether this arrangement was born of political necessity or genuine affection remains debated, but the evidence suggests a careful balance of power that worked remarkably well for 2 decades. The delicate dance of legitimacy required constant maintenance. Every morning, Hatshepsut would greet the sunrise dressed in the regalia of a male pharaoh, while her courtiers performed elaborate ceremonies that reinforced her divine right to rule. Her closest advisor, Senenmut, appeared in an unprecedented 40 statues alongside the female king, more than any other official in Egyptian history. These statues showed him in intimate positions with the royal family, even holding the princess Neferur in his arms, suggesting a complete reinvention of traditional court relationships. Some reliefs from this period show Hatshepsut in female dress, while others depict her in male attire, sometimes both appearing in the same scene, a visual representation of how she transcended traditional gender boundaries. Behind the scenes, a complex web of loyalty secured her position. The children of noble families were educated alongside the royal offspring, creating a generation of officials personally devoted to her rule. She placed trusted allies in key religious and administrative posts, while carefully maintaining the fiction that she ruled only to preserve the throne for Thutmose III. The priests of Amun, whose wealth and power had grown enormously under her patronage, provided theological backing for her unprecedented position. They proclaimed her the divine daughter of Amun himself, creating elaborate rituals and festivals that celebrated her unique status. This fusion of religious and political authority created a new kind of Egyptian kingship, one that would flourish for 20 years before collapsing into one of history's most puzzling vanishing acts. The genius of Hatshepsut's political maneuvering lay not in brute force, but in her ability to make the unprecedented seem natural. She didn't break Egypt's religious and political systems. She bent them, reshaped them, and made them work for her. Each morning, as she donned the false beard and royal regalia, she wasn't just dressing as a king, she was redefining what kingship could be. Yet, even as she reached the height of her power, she was laying the groundwork for her own disappearance from history. The erasure of Hatshepsut, a masterstroke of political genius. The chisel struck with surgical precision. Across Egypt's temples and monuments, teams of workers methodically removed every trace of Hatshepsut's reign. Her cartouches, the royal name rings that marked her as Pharaoh, were gouged from stone walls. Statues were toppled, smashed, or recarved into the images of other kings. Her obelisks were walled up, hidden from view. This wasn't the random destruction of angry mobs or invading armies. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign of historical redaction. The mystery that would perplex archaeologists for centuries wasn't just why it happened, but when. The timing of Hatshepsut's disappearance from history reveals a fascinating twist. The erasure didn't begin immediately after her death, as one might expect if this were a revenge plot by her stepson. Instead, the evidence suggests the campaign began during the latter part of her reign, potentially even under her own direction. Her body wasn't desecrated. It was carefully mummified and placed in a royal tomb with full honors. Her greatest monuments weren't destroyed but modified, with surgical alterations to remove only her royal imagery while preserving the structures themselves. Most tellingly, records show that many of her closest officials continued to serve in Thutmose III's government, suggesting not a purge, but a carefully managed transition of power. What emerged from recent archaeological evidence paints a picture not of vengeance, but of brilliant political calculation. As Thutmose III reached maturity, Hatshepsut appears to have orchestrated her own fade from history, systematically removing the evidence of her unprecedented rule to smooth her stepson's path to uncontested kingship. She understood that her reign, however successful, was an anomaly that challenged the very foundations of Egyptian kingship. By erasing herself, she ensured that Egypt's political system could return to its traditional male-centered structure without the lingering questions her rule might raise. The erasure wasn't an ending. It was her final masterstroke of political genius, protecting both her legacy and Egypt's stability through her own disappearance. In the end, the scars left by the chisels became as telling as the images they removed. Each carefully excised cartouche, each methodically altered statue, testified to the existence of something extraordinary, a ruler so significant that even their removal from history required monumental effort. In attempting to vanish completely, Hatshepsut paradoxically ensured that future generations would be compelled to search for her, making her ultimate legacy not the monuments she built, but the fascinating puzzle of her self-imposed disappearance. The archaeological detective story, unraveling Hatshepsut's mystery. When archaeologists first stumbled upon the ruined monuments of Deir el-Bahari in the 1800s, they faced a baffling puzzle. The magnificent temple clearly belonged to a powerful pharaoh, yet the royal names had been meticulously chiseled away. Stranger still, the few intact reliefs showed a ruler depicted sometimes as a man, sometimes as a woman. It wasn't until 1822, when Jean-François Champollion cracked the code of hieroglyphics, that the first clues about this mysterious pharaoh began to emerge. A single forgotten cartouche overlooked by ancient stonemasons contained a feminine name ending, Hatshepsut. The real breakthrough came in 1903, when Howard Carter, years before his famous discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, uncovered a hidden chamber in the back of a cliff tomb known as KV-20. Inside lay a perfectly preserved sarcophagus bearing Hatshepsut's name, alongside ritual objects identifying her as King of Upper and Lower Egypt. But the mummy was missing. The hunt for Hatshepsut's body would become one of Egyptology's greatest mysteries, leading archaeologists on a century-long chase through the Valley of the Kings. When they finally found her in 2007, it was in the most unexpected place. She had been hiding in plain sight, resting in a simple coffin labeled only as the Nurse, moved there in antiquity for reasons still debated today. The discovery of her mummy revealed new secrets. CT scans showed she likely died in her 50s from an infection caused by a dental abscess, complicated by what appeared to be bone cancer. Perhaps most intriguingly, she had been morbidly obese, a sign of the prosperity of her reign, but also possibly a factor in her health issues. In her burial chamber, archaeologists found a small jar containing her liver, labeled with both her female name and her male throne name, a final testimony to her dual identity as both woman and king. The painstaking work of archaeological reconstruction revealed something remarkable. Rather than being an aberration in Egyptian history, Hatshepsut's reign represented a peak of cultural and economic achievement. Her building projects pioneered architectural innovations that would influence Egyptian design for centuries. The trade routes she established continued to enrich Egypt long after her name had been chiseled from the monuments. Even the political system she carefully manipulated survived intact, allowing for one of ancient Egypt's smoothest power transitions. In trying to erase herself from history, Hatshepsut had inadvertently created one of its most compelling mysteries, one that would take 3 millennia and the combined efforts of countless archaeologists to finally unravel. The Queen Who Became King, Hatshepsut's Enduring Legacy. History has a peculiar way of preserving exactly what someone tries hardest to erase. In the grand irony that marks so many great lives, Hatshepsut's attempt to vanish from the record only made her more fascinating to future generations. Her story emerged not from the grand proclamations she carved into temple walls, but from the spaces where those proclamations were meticulously removed. Each chisel mark meant to hide her existence instead preserved it, creating a negative image, like a photograph's inverse, of one of history's most remarkable rulers. The final twist in Hatshepsut's tale lies in its modern resonance. 3.5 millennia after she donned the false beard and declared herself king, her story speaks to contemporary questions about power, gender, and identity. She was neither Egypt's first woman to hold power nor its last, but she was unique in how she wielded it, not as a woman ruling in a man's stead, but as someone who transcended the gender boundaries of her time to create something entirely new. Her reign marked not just a golden age for ancient Egypt, but a moment when all the established rules about power and identity were rewritten by someone with the vision to see beyond them. In her final act of self-erasure, she demonstrated perhaps the most crucial truth about power. Sometimes the most effective way to change a system is to let it appear unchanged. She vanished not to be forgotten, but to ensure that what she had built would endure. And in that, despite every effort to erase it, her legacy remains carved not just in stone, but in the very fabric of history itself.